Hello and welcome to the podcast, 10 Lessons It Took Me 50 Years to Learn, where we dispense wisdom, not just information or mere fact, to an international audience of rising leaders. My name is Duff Watkins and I'm your host. This podcast is sponsored by the Professional Development Forum, which helps young professionals of any age accelerate their career in the modern workforce. Today you'll hear honest, practical advice that you can't find in any book because it took us 50 years to learn this stuff. Today's guest is David Chalke, who is Australia's foremost social analyst and futurist. Now that sounds kind of wanky, and it is. Let me tell you what. Well, actually, if you go online, you'll find David is described as a cultural soothsayer, a business fortune teller, a futurologist. So, David, what are you, like a witch doctor or something, David? Welcome to the show.
I think the best description I ever had made was at a youth conference that I was addressing. And this young fellow with too many body piercings and too much art introduced me as an old guy who knows a lot of shit.
I can attest that. It's true.
Yeah. And I was told afterwards that was a compliment, but you can judge for yourselves over the next few minutes.
Well, seriously, what you are is a social forecaster. For decades, you have been analyzing the data, determining where society is shifting in terms of attitudes and behaviors. Now, this is important to business because business wants to know where is the consumer heading, where are they going to spend. Governments want to know, and I know you've altered many papers for governments, they want to know, same thing, where is the population, where is society heading in terms of attitudes and behaviors, so they can determine public policy for the future. So that's the serious aspect of the work that you do. Now, I know you're from the UK originally. You studied as a scientist, you worked in Europe, you worked for many big name companies, came to Australia, were director of strategy for a couple of big name advertising PR companies back in the day. But for the last few decades that I know of, you've been doing this social research. Now, let me ask you the first question. Do you recall what your first business lesson was?
The very first business lesson was sitting in a meeting with all the heavyweights at this large multinational. I'd been allowed in there for the first time as the bright young kid. And the old guy, really old, he must have been at least 40, leaned across and said to me, look, don't say anything, just listen, because it's better to sit there and look stupid than open your mouth and prove it. And that was the first business lesson I ever learned. Don't open your mouth unless you've got something serious to say.
God, I wish he had told me that years ago. It's never too late. All right, okay, let me ask you this one. What have you unlearned lately? And I mean something you absolutely positively knew to be true, but now realize probably not the case.
Well, certainly I always used to think that I was the smartest person in the room, but I've been disabused of that over many years.
Well, today I am, because there's nobody here except...
Oh, exactly right.
But that's a rarity. Yeah. All right, let's start with the 10 lessons it took you 50 years to learn. Number one lesson, look upwards, sideways, and downwards.
Okay, well, to achieve anything in any organization, you have to work with other people. You have to have not merely their cooperation, but ideally their active support. And that means you have to manage them. And it means you have to talk to them in ways that they understand that they're interested in and make a good fist of what you're doing. It's called omnidirectional management. That ability to manage up, sideways, and as well as downwards. Now, most people think of management as being looking after the troops underneath you. It's not. It's about managing your peers, and especially it's about managing upwards, as the experience at Australia Post has shown us. A CEO who failed to manage upwards successfully.
Well, yeah, just to explain that to listeners. Well, you want to explain it to listeners?
Sure.
It's kind of funny, really. I mean,
it is great fun. A new CEO was brought into Australia Post, which is government owned, but run like a private enterprise. But the only shareholder, yes, the post office, and the only shareholder is the government. They brought in a new CEO from private enterprise, and she started running it like a private enterprise business. And of course, that meant rewarding executives well, giving them gifts. And on one occasion, she dished out Cartier watches to her senior reports who'd done a particularly good job. This particularly inflamed the Prime Minister of the country when he was presented with this information in Parliament, and he then duly called for her to be sacked, which in fact she was. And it was a failure on her part to manage upwards, to manage the expectations of her bosses.
Because she was rewarding employees in a conspicuous way, employees who had or they had earned Australia Post millions of dollars in new revenue.
Absolutely, but in government you do not give Cartier watches. That sort of ostentation is not acceptable, and so she suffered the consequences.
Yeah. All right, lesson number 2. Keep walking. Okay, David, what are we doing? Aerobics now? Keep walking. What do you mean?
Absolutely. Well, or is it perhaps an advertisement for Johnny Walker whiskey? No, it's neither of those. It's called, it's MBWA, Management by Walking About, or Walking the Floor. You will learn more. You will keep in touch with others. You will pick up the early vibes. You will pick up signs of discontent. You will pick up signs of early success. You will connect with the people in the organizations, the ones that you have to manage sideways, manage downwards, manage up. If you're there talking to them, it's no good sending memos. You have to be there to be seen, to touch the flesh and make a human connection. And they similarly will make a connection back to you and feed you with useful information. It's visible management. Talk a lot, listen more importantly, but whatever you do, don't be a gossip.
Well, okay, so management by walking around that's one I remember from the 80s, but the importance of it is to be visible. My understanding is to be visible and to actually have contact. One thing people on the floor, or in any business, I'm using that metaphorically, a laptop manager, a person who's locked in their office sending out a continuous stream of emails, they're aloof and detached and distanced in the worst way, and so you're suggesting don't do that.
Definitely. I mean, and there's two sides. First of all, if all you do is connect by sending memos, you're not really going to get that active support that you need from people, but also you lose the opportunity to come on to the next lesson, which is number 3, which is to get feedback from them.
Yeah, lesson number 3, keep listening. Okay, now I got to ask you, this seems pretty bleeding obvious. So why is it so hard, and why do we have to keep hearing this?
Well, often the most important thing, and Drucker wrote this, that you have to hear what is not being said. Now that sounds a bit philosophical, but in essence, people will say, how are things going? Yeah, good, thanks. And a look on their face will tell you, no, it's not good, thanks. That will tell you there's something wrong. Well, what? Okay, and you say, what's wrong? Is it personal? Is it the work? Is it the way the office is happening? And it's only by hearing what isn't said that you pick up those vibes, you pick up those signals, those early signs of problem, discontent, success, whatever it is, that enable you to better manage your business and your operation.
You're quoting the management guru, Peter Drucker, of course, hear what's not being said. That resonates in my previous career as a psychotherapist. You must hear the underlying affect, the feeling, not just the words, and certainly don't take them literally, but hear what the emotional component of the communication.
Correct, and it is that feeling, it is emotion, it's that non-linear, non-rational stuff, which is often the most important in any communication, is finding out what people are genuinely feeling, not necessarily what they're mouthing. And sometimes they'll not tell you because they're being polite. They won't tell you because you're the boss and they're afraid. Or they won't tell you because they haven't got the words to express it themselves. So your skill set is to hear what is not being said.
That is so true. A client of mine, he always described it as having your antenna wavering, trying to pick up. But in the performance management coaching that I do, one of my selling points to clients is I tell the people that I work with, they will tell me things they won't tell you because you're the boss or you're the company. For example, a guy might say to me, well, you know that David Chalke is a jackass. And I say, yeah, I know, but he's the boss, so we got to work with that, but they won't tell you that to your face because of the way it is.
Yeah.
Okay, so I understand. So being more receptive to the unspoken aspects of the communication.
Sure. And you will only get that by management, by walking about. You won't get it through memos.
Yeah, you're reminding me, I have asked many CEOs who are managing directors of Asia Pacific. I would say, do you need to go to Korea? Do you need to go to Hong Kong? Do you need to go to China? Do you need to go to, do you need to go to Malaysia? All these countries that you keep going to, and can't you do it remotely? And I was asking this back in the 1990s and 2000. Every time the answer was yes. You simply must be there in order to make things happen. Otherwise, you'll miss so much.
That is just completely true. And we forget, because we've been through a whole process of scientific management, trying to make management scientific. Management is not about science. It is about human interaction. And if you forget that, to your peril.
All right. Lesson number 4, keep it plain.
Please, please, please use plain English. Avoid jargon. And I know jargon has a role in shortening communications and making things simple within a particular craft area. So marketing has its own jargon, accounting has its own jargon. But please, when you're communicating or trying to communicate with others, avoid jargon that they don't use. One of the real pitfalls with jargon is people tend to use it to make themselves look clever. And they will fall back on, hey, we're going to deep dive this. No, you're going to explore it. What's your core competency? Well, what are you good at? Hey, it's in the ballpark. Well, approximately would do just as well. So avoid pretentious prolixity if you can.
Okay, well, let's not stop there. Let's reach out. You know, how about contact people? How about corporate speak, which is bullshit by any name and definition.
Yeah.
Okay, so my question is, why do people choose these terms which obfuscate rather than explain?
Well, sometimes it is indeed to do that. It is to obfuscate. As Orwell wrote, one of the major problems of communication is basic insincerity. And if you're trying to confuse your listeners, he described it as being like a cuttlefish spurting ink. You throw out these words in a great cloud that makes it look as if you know what you're talking about, but is in fact designed to confuse and to obfuscate. The second reason for doing it is, of course, to make yourself look important, to make yourself look, well, I know all these long words, and if you don't, well, it just shows how much smarter I am than you. That's another one. The other one is to show that you're part of the club. You know, if everybody else is deep diving, well, you jolly well ought to deep dive too. Don't go exploring. Don't go and play Scott of the Antarctic with us, kid. You need to get your flippers on and deep dive. So it is a form of identification, and this applies not only in business, it applies in every way of life. We all form opinions of people based on their use of language and their capacity to express themselves. And you find it now amongst the politically correct that you can immediately be identified as not one of us if you use the wrong sort of phrase, if you use the wrong pronoun even these days.
And it goes back to something you said earlier, and I've heard you say many times in your presentations, the ones that I've attended, this is a very, very human need to belong to a group, to a tribe, to something more than me alone. So yeah, I'll dress a certain way, I'll talk a certain way, because that's a very deep, basic human need.
Absolutely. We are, after all, tribal people. We're tribal creatures. We are herd creatures, but the herd is not that big. Some interesting work has been done over the years on what is the size of our tribe? What is the size of our grouping? And a fellow called Dunbar in the UK has done a lot of work of this, exploring Neolithic and medieval groupings and how people, and he worked out that the best size, the optimum size for a troop is about 100, 110, because we haven't the capacity to recognize and name more than that. And it was a nice bit of interesting academia until Facebook appeared. And somebody used the data from Facebook to work out what's the average number of friends people have got on Facebook. It's 100, 110. That is the size of our tribal unit. Can't work. And one of the features, and we'll come on to talk about this later, is the echo chamber effect of social media. The one thing that social media has done is it's allowed us to aggregate into little groups just like ourselves, to create our own little echo chambers where we are reinforced in our own worldview, where you get thumbs up, where you get likes, where you get shared. Whoa, I must have said something right. And that really is going back to that basic Dunbar truth. We like small groups. And in fact, you can see it in the military has known this for years. The Romans knew it.
Mm-hmm.
That's why you have a centurion. How many people has he got in his group? A century, 100.
Mm-hmm.
That's the operating unit. Today, it's a company in the armed forces. So the ability to look beyond that becomes, yeah, I can sort of identify, but really when you come back to that core group, and that's where things like the power of word of mouth becomes so important. It is the most underrated, but the most powerful of all communication media, is to hear from somebody within your Dunbar group. We've lost that ability. Certainly, you could say that in the 20th century, we developed mass marketing, mass communication, mass media, and the whole concept of mass that we are now seeing, courtesy of social media, that was an aberration. In fact, for all human history, we have been fragmented into little Dunbar groups. And it's only the latter part of the 20th century that we thought we could do everything by mass, and we're now learning that we can't.
You used the phrase in one of your presentations, I've never forgotten it, all this mass movement, mass marketing, all it has done is drive us to, this is the phrase, to self-curate, a lot of self-curating going on. Would you explain that, please?
Well, self-curating, it means that you're collecting, as indeed the manager of a museum does. They create and curate an exhibition. We now self-curate the media that we want to watch, that we want to see, that we want to listen to, the sites we go back to time and time again, the Facebook groups that we are members of, and so on. And therefore we collect around us and curate our own little view of the world. Our little window on the world is constructed according to the way we see it, not according to the way that necessarily it is. And every time people talk about politics, you discover this coming through, that people have a view of the world that isn't necessarily the same as everybody else's.
This sounds like confirmation bias, a well-known psychological phenomenon where basically I recruit things, beliefs, people that confirm pretty much what I want to think and thinking right now.
That's right. And well, I keep saying to people, nobody listens to a radio station that they shout at.
True.
True. And in fact, we've seen this recently displayed where the head of production of radio of the ABC has now recognized at long last that their little group is talking to a narrow section of inner metro elites, and that they have to expand their interest, the interest of their viewers, and starts talking about things that what Hillary Clinton called the deplorables are interested in, not just what they're interested in.
Yeah, and the ABC is the national radio program network here in Australia. And the deplorables comment, which was an awful comment for her to make, but basically it's been taken to mean those poor, pitiable people who comprise the bulk of society, who didn't go to Ivy League universities, who don't work in banking and finance and get big bonuses and receive Cartier watches. These are the people, actually, these are your neighbors. I mean, you live outside Melbourne in the country now. I think your neighbors are cows, and you told me a few things about, oh no, what's the joke you said one time about the internet? The surprising thing about the internet, we think we're going to use it for all these fantastic things, and we do. It's a great research tool, but what are most people interested in the internet? Watching videos of kittens playing drums. And
absolutely,
I think you were exaggerating. I hope you were exaggerating.
Well, I think there is a lot of unspoken use for other activities that most people don't admit to in polite company, but certainly the amusing little meme is a very powerful tool. But no, one of the reasons I cite Hillary Clinton and the deplorables, it's one of the fundamentals of communication is that people process words and pictures and images according to their own set of values, their own beliefs, their own inbuilt mechanisms. And Hillary was talking to her fans, her supporters, who certainly saw the people who would vote for Trump as deplorable because they drove pickup trucks, had gun racks, saluted the flag, drank Jack Daniels or God what else. These were not people like us. And language is used by many people to define us and them and the other. And of course, the trouble with the deplorables was she'd forgotten that all that big band of red down the middle of the United States, they saw themselves as being defined as the way she described them. And they said, whoa, that's not for us. She's not for us. She regards us as deplorable. We'll show them, we'll send them a Donald. And they did.
Yes, and those people she described, I grew up there. You know, I mean, those people, I grew up in the South. I'm a Southerner, and they heard that message loud and clear. They very much so. Yeah. And so they took it to heart because they didn't like being called names by Mrs. Clinton. Okay, which takes us to lesson number 5. Your world is not everyone's.
Correct. As we've spoken about forming into little tribal groups and even larger groups, the difficulty for many managers and many communicators is that collectively they are smarter than average. They've got 1 or 2 degrees, they've got a postgraduate qualification, they live in trendy inner metro lofts. They have Cartier watches given to them by their boss. Freely. And they live in a world and surrounded by other people who share that world with them that is very different from the bulk of the people in the country. Now, if you're marketing to people who buy mass commodities, whether it be butter or sugar or tea or soft drinks or fast food, you have to phrase your communication in ways that they will understand. Because as I mentioned before, an audience takes out of the message what they already believe. They're conditioned, they filter it, they process it according to their existing worldview. And the Hillary Clinton thing was a perfect example of somebody sending the message which got miscommunicated because it's what they were expecting to hear. And by God, they got it too. So if you're going to communicate, you have to understand what your audience's mindset is, and then craft your message in such a way that they take out of it what you intend, what you want them to do, not what you think you're doing. And I mean, one of the greatest failures of communication is to believe that by having sent the message, you've communicated.
Mm-hmm. You've done.
You haven't. That's right. You've sent a message, but it ain't been received terribly well.
This is a deep point in the sense that I was reading it and I'm thinking your world is not everyone's. We have guests on this podcast, senior business people with international who were raised in developing countries. My wife is Brazilian and she's lives in the very cosmopolitan, very modern city of Sao Paulo, but she was raised in Brazil during a military dictatorship, and she has very different views about the nature of the government and military because she has a different experience. And it makes me think of what the late great negotiator Herb Cohen said, a line that I've never forgotten: every person is a foreign country. And if you realize that, it makes a difference.
Yeah, and this goes back to what we were spoken about before. Spend more time listening than telling, because it's only by hearing what isn't being said that you understand their perspective, their worldview, and then you can craft your message in such a way that they will understand it in a way that you wish them to.
All right, this takes us to point number 6. This is my favorite. RESPECT. Let me tell you what it means to me. Respect.
Yes. Well, and the lovely thing about that story was originally written by Otis Redding.
Yes.
And then sung by Aretha Franklin. And when he heard that...
Oh, I thought you'd never mention Soul Number 1, 1967, Aretha Franklin belting out RESPECT. Respect.
And he said, damn, that woman, she gone stolen my song. Because it was one of those great cases where the copy was greater than the original. And Otis's version is all right, but it ain't got nothing in comparison to Aretha.
And everybody has done that song since then, but that's the RESPECT.
And and that wasn't in the Otis Redding version. Aretha invented that. She put it in. She created that. Anyway, the thing about RESPECT is only work for people and organizations that you respect. And in the 50 years I've been in the workplace, I have made that mistake on the past of working for people who I didn't respect. And consequently, one of two things happen. You either find you dislike yourself because you've sold your soul to the devil and you don't enjoy the experience, or they pick it up very quickly and they end up suggesting that you might like to part company and go and work somewhere else. So for yourself and for the sake of the other organization, never work for people you don't respect. There's nothing to be gained in it.
It basically is a time bomb that's ticking. I mean, anytime you're in and really anytime, that's what I tell people, anytime you're in a job that you don't like, you don't fit, this is not working, it's just ticking, and it's going to go off sooner or later.
Yeah. And far better that you are sufficiently honest, and maybe this is coming on to something we'll talk about later on, but sufficiently honest to yourself to say, hey, hang on, this is not the right place to be. I'm compromising myself there. I will move on. I will find something better, something that I can believe in, because who wants to spend 8, 9, 10 hours a day plus commuting plus all the rest of it doing something you don't believe in?
Okay, so what do you do though if you feel you don't have a choice? You're stuck in this company. Maybe it's a big company. Maybe you're a drone in the hive. Maybe you're working for a company that makes carbonated sugar water, Coca-Cola. Maybe you're working for a company that makes cigarettes. I don't know, whatever. And it's a clash of values. What do you do then? But because you're just person that needs an income, you've got a family, you've got responsibilities, you have obligations. It becomes a bit harder then.
It is difficult, and those are the reasons I found myself in the past in that situation, because I needed the job and the job was reasonably paid, and I thought, well, I'll just bite the bullet for a while. I suppose that the advice that I would give is probably the one that I followed. You grin and bear it for as long as you can. Meanwhile, you're on the phone to your friendly headhunter saying, get me out of here. You look for an alternative. It is soul destroying to work in that sort of environment. You get nothing for it. You end up turning up late. You can't be bothered. The in-tray keeps building up. And it's no good to either you or the employer. So you might as well find a way to extricate yourself and move on.
Yeah, all you get is the dollars, really. The psychic cost is greater than people don't seem to account for that, but it's very it erodes you from the inside.
It does, and it's reflected too when you get home, because you're not happy there. Your relationships with your wife, your partner, whoever, your friends, they all suffer and you suffer. It's not worth doing. It really isn't. Go and find something else to do. Retrain.
Well, the first thing is take care of yourself. Get the hell out of there. But
yeah.
All right. Lesson number 7. This must be a mistake. This must be a misprint. Lesson number 7 is don't deceive. Come on, Dave. Would you realize you want to undermine the entire industries of marketing and advertising? I mean, isn't business built on deception?
Not at all. I mean, one of the firms I used to work for, McCann Erickson, its motto was truth well told. It sounds a little bit pretentious, but ultimately that's what great communication and great advertising is about. Because if you don't tell the truth about your product in the advertising, the punters will very soon work it out and they will take their revenge on you. As Ogilvy said, the best way to kill a bad product is great advertising. And it's true, because it offers a promise that isn't met. And that says, you lied to me, brand, company, whoever you are, you told me a deliberate lie. Therefore, I will trash you and your reputation. And in this day and age, it's very easy to get your revenge on that organization through social media.
Oh my God, I love to do that too, by the way.
Oh, absolutely. The only thing I would say to people is, for heaven's sake, be careful when you're writing a trash review about a restaurant or a shop. And because this is now considered to be publishing, you can be sued for defamation. Beware.
Okay, but do customers do that though? I mean, seriously, I mean, there is, in my observation, in marketing and in advertising, a great deal of deception. Am I just making that up, or is there some truth to that?
In bad advertising and bad marketing, yes, there is deception. And as I say, ultimately the consumer works it out, or the end user or the recipient of that advertising works it out that it is a con. And it will then rebound on the organization. There is an element of, what was it, Walter Scott wrote, what a tangled web we weave when at first we practice to deceive. And the trouble with telling fibs is eventually they do bounce back on you. Yeah, I mean, little white lies that we we tell in everyday communication just to be polite and not to offend people. They're fine, but fundamental ones about the business, about what the product is offered, and that's why we have people like the ACCC and the advertising standards people to stop people telling fibs.
Yeah, you're not talking about social lubricants, the social niceties, but you know, the key, you quoted that phrase, what a tangled web we weave when we practice to deceive. To me, the key word in that is practice to deceive. And I see a lot of practicing going on out there, as so it appears. And so it's not happenstance, it's not ad hoc, it's systematic. And that's what I am curious, though, if there is a price to be paid for it. Because frankly, David, sometimes I wonder, do they ever really suffer? Companies or politicians or institutions?
Well, certainly in a political sense, they certainly do. We've seen that in the past. In terms of business, yes, they do. I mean, one of the case studies that I often cite is out of Decor, a brand of shampoo. Shampoo was launched here 10, 15 years ago. With a brilliant advertising campaign.
Yeah, they were.
People shampooing their hair in the shower, singing to themselves to Duke of Earl. But Duke of Earl became Decor. Decor. Brilliant. Trial went through the roof. Absolutely up. Repeat purchase fell straight down because it was a rubbish product, and it goes back to Ogilvy. People do punish it. The product died, and there are many, many products that have been put on the market. A promise was made, and it was never met, and it's been killed. Withdrawn eventually due to lack of consumer support. It was rubbish. Yes, people do deceive, and we've had banking royal commissions showing a lot of deception by those organisations, and that's why there is not only the force of the market to underpin truth in business, but also the ACCC. And part of the reason with the Banking Royal Commission was that it was an oligopoly anyway. There was only the four big ones, and the balance of power, the imbalance of power between the bank and the customer is so great that the customer is really stuck. They can't actually get out of it. It's very difficult for them to move. So free choice was something that the Royal Commission admitted. Yeah, you've got to make it easier for people to move their business. That way you will get the banks to behave reasonably.
You're mentioning the ACCC. That is in Australia. That's the Australian regulator of a lot of things, and a Royal Commission is about as serious as it gets in this country, basically. And it went on, very expensive, and it was a big deal. And basically, found the banks were charging fees for no service, is the famous phrase that came out of it. That's and right. Basically, they took a stick to the banks since then.
So there is that balance, and yes, the propensity is there for organisations to say, well, if we can get away with it, let's do it. And they were charging bank fees to people who were dead. You know, it's this sort of nonsense. And that's where you need in any market economy, you do need regulation and a regulator. Otherwise, the free market, you then go back to the madness of the Wild West and snake oil salesmen. So you need that balance with both regulation, free choice, and market forces. But certainly, if going back to what we say, don't deceive your customers, because I believe ultimately it will come and bite you on the bum, or you'll get a Royal Commission. Don't deceive your colleagues. Don't pretend to them. You have to work with them. Yes, you have the polite social lubricant, but nonetheless, you must be straight and honest with your colleagues and your family and your friends, because that ultimately, if you are a fibber, you will get caught out, and that will not play out well.
I'll go you one further, speaking as a former psychotherapist. Don't deceive yourself. Start right there, and that'll solve a lot of problems for you, and because you'll have a certain degree of clarity, which will just make life so much easier.
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, because I don't deceive myself, I am 6'4", brutally handsome, with a fine head of hair.
Just make a note. Give David feedback.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right, lesson number 8, build a shed. You want me to build a shed? I'm not a do-it-yourself kind of guy. Now you want me to take up carpentry.
Absolutely right. It's only a metaphor for nourishing your own interests. outside work. If all you have is work, you become a very dull person. You must have something beyond that, whether it be horse racing, soccer, or in my case, do it yourself and getting the lathe out and whittling and putting things together and taking them apart. Whatever it is, you must have some other interest outside work. And it goes back to that business of your world is not everybody else's. You must learn something beyond the four corners of this establishment that you're working in. You must think beyond that, have a greater interest, whether it be music, classic cars, or classical music. You must have something beyond that, as I say, otherwise you will become a very narrow person.
And narrow people are pretty uninteresting to the rest of us.
Well, that's exactly right. It makes it difficult. I mean, if you have nothing else, what have you got to chat about around the water cooler when you get there and waste the first half hour of the day, not working, but chatting to your friends?
Not wasting, bonding,
interpreting, hearing what's not being said.
Yeah, I'm just walking around managing.
That's right. So if they're interested in soccer, you've got to talk about soccer. If they're interested in car racing, you need to know something there. Have some interest beyond there, because as you say, you will be a very uninteresting person to work with.
All right, let's take us to lesson number 9. I've got some questions for you here about this. Lesson number 9, remember your core purpose. And before you elaborate, I want to ask you, why do we presume that there is a core purpose for people?
Okay, this was written more in terms of the core purpose of the organization that you're working for or with.
Okay.
But also, in a way, your own core purpose goes back to what we were talking about before, about being true to yourself, about having an understanding of yourself and what is your purpose in your life. But as I said, this was written more about the organization and understanding what that business is about. Because at the moment, the world is so fluid and fragmented. It's fragmenting people, fragmenting markets, fragmenting brands. Everything's fragmenting, gone, as we've mentioned before, the age of mass, the times when great trends swept the world and it was like herds of wildebeests fleeing across the Serengeti. Those sorts of trends no longer exist. And because it's all about fragmentation, as soon as something looks like a trend, immediately others barrel in and the thing is fragmented and broken up. So in this time of fragmentation and social media and ideas everywhere and lots of different audiences and programmatic buying and all the rest of it, it's very easy to become distracted and to lose the essence of what that business is actually about. And particularly in times of change, if you lose that, then you're going to be on the reef very soon because you've lost the core of your connection to your market. And I cite the example here of Yellow Pages.
Well, some people may not know what Yellow Pages are, and I haven't seen any in a long time growing up in the US and Australia. Just like a telephone book filled with advertisers. And when I was growing up, you want to find somebody to do some carpentry or upholstery, you go to the Yellow Pages and all the practitioners were listed there alphabetically, and it was great, but they paid to be included. And so it was the go-to, it was kind of like the Google of its time.
That is exactly the point, that in fact, what Yellow Pages, the people thought, well, we're in the business of publishing. Okay, Yellow Pages was a collection, it was a directory of businesses, whether it be carpenters, plumbers, seamstresses, psychoanalysts, you name it. It was a great big book, and it was delivered to every household in the area. And so you would have your phone book, white pages, which had telephone numbers in, and then you would have your Yellow Pages, which was a business directory. And it was a very successful business model. And the advertising theme was, let your fingers do the walking.
Yes.
In other words, finger through the book before you decide, and phone up, and before you decided to visit a store or whatever. And it was immensely successful. And the problem with it was that the people who ran it were convinced that they were in the directory business. In other words, collecting information, putting it in a book, and delivering the book. What they didn't understand was, in fact, they were in the search business. They were, as you said before, a proto-Google. And the problem was that they hang on to the book rather than saying, hey, this new internet thing's really good. Can we actually save money by not printing a book and put this information onto the internet, become a search engine, which they didn't do. And they resisted for so long, and eventually the thing has died. They've tried to come back, and hey, they've Google has destroyed them.
It's gone.
That's right. And in fact, in the early days, they could have gone to Google and say, hey, you be the front end of our directory. And they could have survived that way, but no, it didn't have. They were so hung up with the book that they could never get away from it. So they didn't discover what their core business was. Myer is a department store in Australia. There are two basic department stores. There's an upmarket one called David Jones, and there's Myer, who tried to be a middle market department store. And unfortunately, the market for middle market department stores has gone. It's been destroyed. It's been eaten by either the discounters underneath or online on the side, or even from the top by the quality department stores. And the trouble with Myer is they could never work out what it was. Is it going to be a discounter? Oh, they're cheap, 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 cheap. Or are they a palace to the people, a place of glory and excitement and stimulation? They could never work out what they were. It's a consequence that now declined and declined and declined, and doubtless will vanish from the scene. Well, again, I don't know if it's Peters or Drucker, somebody wrote that the essence of strategy for a business is adjusting it to its environment, is making it fit into its environment. And when the environment changes, the business has got to change. And that's where speed of management becomes very, very important. And at the moment, with the world changing as rapidly as it is, certainly in communications and marketing terms, you have got to adapt to that very quickly, otherwise you will get left behind. And there are myriads of examples of people who did that here. Here in Australia, the Kmart and Target examples are quite interesting, in that Kmart followed a very simple strategy of fixed pricing. Everything will be to a dollar, $10, $9, $1, and followed that through very well. They have creamed the market. They've seen off their competitors, Big W. They've seen off Target, who were also in the same stable, but they've taken the market by storm by this very simple approach. But we'll keep it simple. We're not going to try and deceive you at $4.99. It's $5, okay? That simple fixed price strategy has worked extremely well for them, plus very good merchandise choice as well, of course, which goes with it. But you can adjust yourself to the market conditions and steal a march on your competitors.
All right, let's go to our final lesson, number 10. Become your own disruptor. What do you mean by that?
Okay, well, in the face of markets that are volatile, changing, disruptors come in and destroy the market condition. We've seen this in every sort of market where somebody new comes in with something, whether it be Amazon or whoever, and they destroy the market model. The whole thing goes topsy-turvy. Well, if you're in that market already, you can either sit back and wait to be disrupted, or you can do the disruption yourself. You can adjust to this and say, here is a new opportunity that we can take based on our understanding of how this world is changing. And what that means is that the old ways of developing products and strategies, where you have an idea, you put the ideas into group discussions, you take them back, you refine them, you then go out and do some quantitative research, testing them, and you conduct a number of models, you take them back, you refine them, and 18 months down the track, you might get into a test market if you're lucky. That's dead. You can't do that. You come up with an idea, you make it, you stick it in the marketplace, you see how it goes. If it works well, you reinforce it. If it doesn't, you kill it. Then you move on to the next idea. So the world now is about rapid innovation, rapid trial, rapid reinforcement, or rapid death. There's no hanging about and doing myriads of group discussions. Otherwise, you end up in analysis paralysis, which is something that nearly killed Procter & Gamble about 15 years ago, where they were so locked into a product development system that took years, they ended up doing nothing and nearly lost their way. Fortunately, they overcame that and are now a very successful organization. But beware of analysis paralysis. No, stick it in the marketplace, especially in a world now where you can identify very tightly little groups to talk to through social media. You don't have to let everybody know what you're doing. You can talk directly to them and then try this thing out and see how it goes. And if it goes well, reinforce it. If it doesn't, kill it off and move on to the next one.
I've heard the phrase fail fast, and you try it, you tinker, tweak it, try it again. If it works, great. If not, then on to something else or another version. And
the thing is, you're not seen to have failed, because if you're honest with your audience, say, hey, look, we're going to try something new. Give it a go. What do you think? This is the beta version. Would you like to try it? they'll say, oh yeah, happily, I'll give that a go. I'll give it some feedback. If you put it out and say, hey, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread, and it's not, then it is seen to be a fail and affects your reputation. So this fail fast idea is critical to the new world, but the punters like it too, because there's no greater word in marketing than new.
Yeah.
Or free. That's the other one.
Yeah, that's one of the popular ones too. Okay, that formally finishes our 10 lessons it took you 50 years to learn. Let me ask you one question before we exit here, David. You've been studying trends, public behavior, the shifting mood of populations in society for decades. Where are we heading, do you think? I know that's a big question.
In a way, I think we're going back to the future, in that we are going back to the world of the 18th century. Whilst there are mass forces around, we'll all go and vote for a president in the United States or whatever there is. But beyond that, we're going to go back to our little towns, our little villages, our little tribes. And yes, we'll hear all the outside noise, but essentially it's going to be my Dunbar group that is the most important thing. So this notion of fragmentation, of tight targeting through word of mouth, through social media, is going to take on more and more importance as we go forward. It doesn't mean that there's going to be anarchy, that we're all going to take to the streets, but it does mean that dealing with groups of people will become more dependent upon an authentic voice in that group. And we've seen that here in Victoria, here in Australia, recently with the outbreak of COVID-19, where the messages were put out largely in English, and the English-speaking population tended to follow quite well the necessary actions to prevent the spread of the virus. However, non-English-speaking groups, recent migrant communities, didn't get the message because it wasn't communicated to them in a way that they could understand. And they were a cause of infection and transmission of the disease for quite a while, until we got round to working out how to communicate effectively with that group. And that meant talking to the leaders within those groups and getting the message across that way. And I think we're going to have to see more and more of that form of communication in the future.
We will end on that note, and we will finish here. You've been listening to the international podcast, 10 Lessons It Took Me 50 Years to Learn. Today's guest has been David Chalke. This episode has been produced by Robert Hossery and is sponsored by the Professional Development Forum. PDF provides webinars, social media discussions, podcasts, parties, anything you want to know, everything you need to know, you can find at professionaldevelopmentforum.org. Best of all, it's free. Did I mention that it's free? David, you mentioned that it's free. It's a great word, free. So thank you, folks, for listening to us today. Please join us for the next episode of 10 Lessons It Took Me 50 Years to Learn.